A very good afternoon to you, and a very good morning to Indu Guzman, who is our presenter for today, joining straight from the United States. The topic for today is third culture kids, citizens of nowhere and everywhere. So that's a very interesting topic. And Indu has been to 5 countries. And now I hand over the speaking responsibilities to Indu. She can start with a small introduction, and then she can start with the screen sharing.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Hello, everyone. I just want to say I'm excited to be here. I'll be talking about what it's like to be a third culture kid. I mean, who here is hearing the term third culture kid for the first time? Few of you? Okay. Yep. It's fairly a new, I mean, it's not really a new term, but it has been coined only recently. I only learned about the term recently, like about a few years ago when I was moving to Singapore for an international teaching job. And we had this training, and there was a seminar about a third culture kid experience. So that's when I was like listening to it, and I was like, "Whoa, how come I didn't hear this term before?" This has been very helpful to me when I was a teenager, and helped me understand, the international. Because when you're teaching in an international school, you have a lot of expat children, missionary kids, and kids who are very mobile and how they view things too. So it's helped me understand myself. And basically, the definition of a TCK is a person who spent their formative years or years as a young person in a country or culture that is different from their parents. And in this talk, I'll be expanding on that TCK profiles, my own experience as a TCK, and lately, TCK life portrayed in literature and movies, and what it means for me to be a TCK right now. Or sometimes I kind of debate, am I still a TCK or am I basically an immigrant? Because I'm right now settled in Boston after my marriage, and we bought a house here. So that's what I'll talk about, and especially because I know some of you here are editors and writers too. So what does that mean for me as an editor? So let me go ahead and start my screen sharing. So if you hear me saying TCK, that's just my acronym for Third Culture Kid. Well, one question every TCK hates is, where are you from? To a lot of people, asking where are you from is a very simple, straightforward answer. They can answer it in one word or a sentence. But for a TCK, a simple question, it requires an essay response, and an essay length response. So for me, like if somebody's asking me where am I from, I have to think through and ask, okay, what are they really asking me? Is it my place of birth, my nationality, ethnicity, where I grew up, where I currently live? So those are all different answers. So, and then if I say, okay, I'm from Boston, they'd be like, is that what they were looking for? Or did they mean something else from that or my life story? So sometimes I end up, just telling my life story. So I can tell you where I'm from. I was born in New Delhi. So let's see here. I was born in New Delhi, and my parents are Malayali and Tamil. My dad's side was Tamil, and my mom's Malayali. And I grew up mostly in Kerala, so I'm not familiar with Malayalam. Tamil, I can speak a few words. But then when I was a baby, my family moved to Dubai. So I grew up basically in Dubai. I mean, Dubai was the only country I've really known. And I've, of course, visited India on vacations, but it's just not the same as, growing up there. So then I moved to the US as a preteen when I was about 11 years old. First, my family moved to Seattle, Washington, and then to Portland, Oregon. So when I was growing up there, and then I spent one semester abroad as a teenager in India, and actually, to be exact, Coimbatore in a boarding school, and returned to the US. And then, because when you're a TCK, you naturally are used to moving abroad. You just enjoy traveling so much. So in college, I spent like short time abroad in Mexico and Argentina. For Mexico, I did a service trip through my church. It was volunteering and learning about the culture. And then Argentina was a study abroad program to learn the Spanish language and culture. So Argentina was just a wonderful experience because I only took beginner level Spanish, And it was a complete immersion. So I stayed with a woman who barely spoke English, and I spoke only beginner level Spanish. So you get the real experience. And we lived, I mean, Buenos Aires is the main city, but we were staying 3 hours away. I mean, it still has, like a city, but it's not a, we didn't have, there were not a lot of English speakers. So you really get to learn the Spanish. I took classes there and returned. It was a very good experience. And then my professional life, I mostly lived in Portland, Oregon. Then for some time, I took a job in a small town, America. Living like in the middle of Arizona. You feel like you're in a little western, you're living in a little Wild West town. It was a very eye-opening experience for me. Um, and of course, I had some friends ask, why would you want to go there? There's nothing here. But I just found it very fascinating, the rural America. And then, of course, I taught abroad in Singapore at an international school. And that was my background. My professional background is I was a high school English teacher. And now I've shifted to becoming an editor. I freelanced for a few years. And now I work in publishing. I work at Chalice Press, a medium sized publishing company in the US that publishes mostly nonfiction. And I help them with marketing and production tasks. So Singapore to Boston. And now living in Chelmsford. It's a suburb north of Boston, my husband and kids. So when I decided to move to Boston, it turned out to be a good move because that's when I met my husband. Met this wonderful man who's now my husband, 5 years. And he's a biracial American. So if you're wondering my name Guzman, it comes from he's half Colombian and half white American. And his ancestry from his mother's side is Portuguese, Italian, Irish. And I also met, so this is our wedding pictures, just fun pictures I get to show about my family. And that I also got to meet my stepson. That's Eddie. And my husband's ex-wife is Brazilian. So my husband and my stepson know a little Portuguese. And I do not speak a word of Portuguese. The joke is that I speak more Spanish than my husband, even though he is half Colombian. Um, and we have a daughter. Our kids, they're preteen and a preschooler, and they're of course mixed race and ethnicity. So I always wonder it'll be interesting to see how they form their identity and what their experiences are. Because now they're kids, I mean, they're just starting to notice the differences, but you'll kind of hear more about them when they get older. So this is kind of how we're living. It's our family picture. And this is one time I took my husband and my stepson to a Diwali festival because I wanted, we just thought it'd be good to expose our kids to all different cultures. And this is my daughter's Ava's first birthday party. And we did something like they call it a cake smash, which is commonly done for pictures. They'll just put a cake in front of the 1-year-old and take the pictures of the child playing with the cake. And it makes a cute picture, but she was really funny because first when she put the cake, she was looking at it like, what is this? She touched it very daintily, looking at it, staring at the cake. Then eventually she found out she could dig in. So that's what we did. And then her first birthday is right here. And, I was thinking about how do I want to do with, being a TCK or being, a cross-cultural person. I think about things like, okay, how do you celebrate it? Do we do it Indian style, mixed style, or I guess you could say American style, Western, which way? So I was thinking, organizing a party for a 1-year-old. We just thought we'll keep like close family and friends because I thought having a big party for a small child can get a little overwhelming for her. That's a lot to plan. So we just had like a background like this, a little party like this. And she had a lot of fun, even though I'm not sure she understood what was really going on. It was a lot of fun. So let's go into TCK or Third Culture Kid, what it is. It was coined by a sociologist, Ruth Hill and Hussein. She was a sociologist from Michigan State University. So she's kind of recognized as the mother of TCK or Third Culture Kid studies. Of course, people have migrated for more than a millennium. And during the previous centuries, due to colonialism and so many reasons, there were accounts of Europeans who grew up in the colonies and felt that they never belonged anywhere. And plus, there's also, when you think about colonialism, there's the dynamics of the power relations and race. And also in those old days, when you're going abroad, going in ships would take like about 2 months. So there's more of a transition and the goodbyes are more permanent. In the 1960s or later, when commercial air travel was available, it added some new dynamics to it. And since air travel was more readily available, more people lived abroad and had mobile careers, which led to an increased awareness of TCKs. Sorry, excuse me, one moment, please. Please. All right, all right, I'm back. So where was I? So the term, like I said, was coined by Ruth Hill's theme, and it was in the late 1950s when she and her husband went to India to study how Americans who lived as expats in India, lived. And these were like foreign service workers, missionaries, business people, educators, media representatives. And she studied how they interacted with the local Indians and vice versa. But then she also observed the children of the expats and noticed that there's a, you know, interstitial or third culture where they feel like they live in a neither nor type of world. It's like the kids will feel like they're not really American, but they're not exactly Indian. So, and it was shared by the whole expat community. So that is where the idea came from. And of course, it has been expanded on. And a lot of the information I'm sharing, it comes from these two books, which I highly recommend if you want to understand what's a third culture kid. Um, Third Culture Kids, Growing Up Among Worlds and Misunderstood, from by Tanya Crossman. This one really gives a lot of information, covers everything. Tanya Crossman kind of expanded it a little bit more. She interviewed teenagers and young people who lived abroad and compared their experiences through interviews, but she expanded a little more because she talks about, because traditionally when they studied the third culture kids, they were talking about like middle class, mostly white families. But now it's like the dynamics are a little bit different because we're increasingly living in a more mobile world. Like if you're a third culture kid, but your family is an Indian American immigrant moving to Korea, for example, that will have a different dynamics and experience. Even regardless, experiences are very different. I mean, no two TCKs are alike, just like how two people from any country is not alike. So when I say third culture kid, this is where the definition comes from. Let's go back. The home culture is basically what's assumed to be the first culture, usually the culture of your parents. And the second culture you encounter would be the host culture where you currently live. And then the third culture is finding your identity between those when you're living that internationally mobile lifestyle. So then a TCK, how does a TCK form their own identity? There's three cultures that TCK kind of adapts. First is the legal culture. It's any country where an individual has a legal standing. It could be a citizenship or permanent residency, and some may have dual citizenship. And then there's the geographic culture. It's any culture in which the child has lived. May or may not include legal cultures. In Tanya Grossman's book, Misunderstood, the impact of growing overseas in the 21st century, 40% of the people she surveyed lived in over 4 cultures and lived in 6 or more during their developmental years. And that could be anything from when they're young and starting to become aware, from 6 years old to about 18. So can you imagine moving so much at that age? And then there's the relational culture. That is the shared experience of similarities and experiences. It doesn't have to be, it's kind of like what you have in common with other people. And to a third culture kid, it doesn't have to be the legal culture or the geographic culture. Like I can remember for me when I was living in Singapore, it was interesting as an Indian American immigrant. It's as if sometimes the locals didn't know what to, or some of the people I encountered don't know what to make out of me. I mean, I heard this a lot, like, you look Indian, but your English sounds different. We were actually talking about my accent, um, oddly. And, it's kind of funny because to Indians, I don't sound Indian. But to Americans, they also say, oh, you still have an Indian accent. Where are you from? I get that asked. And of course, for me, I don't hear my own accent, so I don't know what I sound like. So I'm just going by what other people have told me. At the end of the time, like I was making a comment about something, and the Singaporean was laughing and saying, "Oh, you Westerners." Then I look at her and go, "Wait, what? I'm a Westerner now? What is this?" You know. So that is just the oddities you will find, and I always found out that this. I just found out it's always fun. I just love seeing the humor in these situations. And also when I was in Singapore, even in the expat community, I mean, people recognize me as Indian American. It's like I didn't sound, fully American, and some continue to view me as a hyphenated American. So that kind of makes it a little interesting. Let's see what else. And then, and then we're talking about like what formed my culture, geographic, legal culture. Because think about it, like where do you learn like your manners, behavior, your body language, interest in pop culture? It all comes from where you're brought up. So for TCK, they may adapt to or take a blend of two. So I was kind of thinking, this made me think about where did I get mine from? And I would say most of mine was mostly Dubai, around the Indian expat culture. At that time I used to held an Indian passport. Also, when I lived in Dubai, my religious identity differed. My dad came from a Hindu background, and my mother came from a Catholic background. And religion wasn't really important to either of them. And at that time, this was like in the 80s, early 90s. Indians from two different religious backgrounds were unheard of. It was not very common. So growing up, I was exposed to both those religions and also exposed to Islam because you live in Dubai and we learned about it in school. So I picked up. My father was more very apathetic towards religion. He respected religion, but felt like it wasn't for him. He
Little
just
louder, please.
little
Just
louder.
a little louder.
I'll try. Hold
Yes,
on.
please.
Is this better? Okay. So I picked up my dad's apathy towards religion. He thought it was important to respect religion, but not take it too seriously. I mean, that's his own words. So I remember I picked up on that too. And I remember in school, I was a young child that time. I was having an argument about that with a classmate. She was telling me that my religion is what your father follows. Since my father is, from a Hindu background, I should be a Hindu too. I told her that is not true. You pick your religion or choose to be an atheist. And I had to explain what an atheist is. So that's one experience where I felt like, okay, I could feel that. And another area where I felt out of place and not fitting in was the attitude towards courtship. That means dating, arranged marriage. How do you find your partner? And here's something about me and my family background. My parents both are Indian. They did not have an arranged marriage. Now it's probably not a big deal in India because times are changing. But this was over 40 years ago. And especially in Kerala, in a conservative area, it was a very big deal. My father met my mother in college, and they both wanted to marry. And at the time, my grandparents were horrified and wouldn't have it or didn't want to hear about it at first. But eventually, they agreed to the marriage. My family faced, that rejection prejudice. I didn't really pick up on it when I was really young because, you're a kid. And as a child, I was very naive, and I thought, like, love marriage was not a bad thing, and it's common. I thought it was more common than, just because my parents had one. So I was at a friend's birthday party in Dubai, mostly Indian expats, and I said something like, "Oh, my parents met in college and decided to get married." So that child and a few other kids kind of looked at me, and they were like, "What kind of love marriage?" They were asking me all these questions, and I think that girl's birthday party, her mother was there too. She kind of became interested and looked at me, and they were just curious, They were like wanting to know, and then they were all even more surprised when I told them that my grandparents were okay with it and my family is pretty accepted. And they were kind of like, oh, that's interesting. But to me, that's the first time I remember feeling self-conscious and realizing, wait, I'm different from other Indians. What is this? And I didn't know what to make out of it. And that's the first time I started becoming more perplexed and noticing more things with my family. I mean, the simplest thing is my parents married, but some people, acted like it was something shameful and my mother made a mistake. And they were like certain subtleties I noticed when I was younger. And also this was like in the 80s, so now some people who've never gone there, they're like, what's the big deal? But I guess that's what it is. Um, and then when I immigrated and lived in the US, dating culture really perplexed me too. I just didn't understand it, you know. And also going there, going through the high school traditions like homecoming, what is this dating thing? And it's different. And the thing in America is there's so many different groups. You make it what it is. My parents are like shocked that parents let kids date when at a young age. And then also, but there are also some conservative parents here too, because I had one classmate. She's American, grew up in the US. And her parents did not allow her to have a boyfriend until she was 18 years old. So it's different. And also a lot of people watch these movies. I mean, how dating culture is showed in American movies, it's not really very true. It's very exaggerated and it moves faster than what happens in real life. So people get all kinds of ideas about that abroad. So, of course, so I was growing up as a young adult. I'd done a couple of dates and had a boyfriend or two. In college, I was like seeing somebody, and I told him that as an immigrant or outsider, that I just don't understand this whole dating thing or this whole dating culture. And he laughed and told me, "Don't worry, I'm from this culture, born and raised. I'm a white guy, and I don't understand this dating culture either." And we just laughed. He was a good guy, open-minded, and found me fascinating, but I just felt like we just didn't understand each other because different background. It was difficult. Um, so that's kind of like two examples of how I feel like I don't belong in this either or world. Um, so that's the thing about relational culture. Many TCKs identify strongly with people who shared their childhood experience rather than culture. So here's some experience TCKs may share: familiarity with airports and travel, especially international travel, having these accumulated losses of leaving friends behind and being left by friends. As the expat culture, it's very mobile, so they're used to having that disruption. And then the strangeness of their home country and the mixed emotions that go with being there. Um, and then funny stories of cultural mistakes and the embarrassment of making these mistakes. I have tons of stories, and it's even more embarrassing when it's supposed to be your home culture. Um, and then being part of a group of friends from different cultural and linguistic backgrounds. And then sometimes you miss the things that are supposedly strange about the host culture. I can say both America, India, and even Singapore, they have strange things about their culture. And then confusion of what exactly is home. So that's a common experience. And this is something TCK kids or young people have a difficult identifying, because those who grew up in a monocultural environment and didn't have that have a hard time relating to that or understanding what it is like being in between two cultures. But understanding these three stages of what forms a TCK's identity, it helps you understand why, say you have one individual with a German passport but grew up in China. That person would relate better to a person with a Canadian passport and who grew up in Tanzania, rather than a person who's from Germany or China. The countries here are Germany, China, Canada, Tanzania. I mean, all these four countries have four completely distinct cultures, but both the TCK individuals, they share the similar experience of, that in-betweenness. So that was one thing too. And, a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings can happen. And this is one from this book, Misunderstood. There's one interview that I'm going to share. This is from Yanni, a 21-year-old who was interviewed. She was Chinese. She grew up in Hong Kong and the UK, and then she moved to Australia. She was saying, "I know people who were born and raised in Australia with parents who are fully Asian. I never understood why they called themselves Aussies and had Australian accents. They have no idea about the countries of their parents, and there's a sense they are unwilling to understand or try to bring culture to themselves. They were too arrogant to get to know their own cultures. I never realized they just don't have a connection with it." So sometimes that's what happens too. There's those misunderstandings. My parents and misunderstandings can happen to families too, because when you move abroad as an adult, the experience is different. Because my parents, they went through college, most of their lives in India. So they're much more rooted in the culture. So moving is not, it's a different experience. And for me, I didn't have much of a rootedness there, so I don't have that emotional attachment as much, and that would lead to a lot of misunderstandings. So that is one thing I can tell from myself. Growing up in the U.S. as a teenager, that was a hard part, especially in a suburb that was lacking, I would say, lacking diversity compared to some of the bigger cities. For example, I had a hard time relating to some of the few Indians there because they seemed extremely conservative and religious. And I'm open to all, but I didn't have an issue with their choices. But often, sometimes I felt pushed out or excluded when I opened up about my views on religion and cultural traditions. I mean, some families would be very nosy and expect me to be like them. For example, I was 15 years old and out of the theater and mall with a group of friends, both boys and girls. Somebody saw me and told my parents, expecting my parents not to know, and I'm doing this behind their back. But my mother said, "Oh, yeah, I know them. They're with their friends, and it's okay." And then, I just got reactions of, and it was kind of confusing to me because I was like, "What is wrong with going out? It's not like," and this was like in the late evening. It's not like middle of the night. Um, and the reason then I kind of felt like distancing too, so I kind of reacted accordingly too. And it's not because I have an issue with their choices or their culture. It's just because I just didn't want to deal with the rejection. Because when you're a young person and you're not very confident in your identity, it's hard not to take these things personally, the distancing. Um, so sometimes that would, make me, I'm sure like some people might have seen that and thought of me as arrogant. And likewise with some Americans too. Like I got tired of the constant questions about where I'm from, about India. I mean, sometimes I don't mind sharing. I love to talk about it. But sometimes I feel like, are these questions really leading? Are they just egging me on, or do they really want to know? Like I would have questions like, "Oh, you're from India, right? Is that the culture where you have arranged marriages? How can you live in a place where your parents force you to marry somebody?" I'm like, "That's really what you think it is," but then they don't really want to. It's like they're not really hearing you. So I would get frustrated by both of that. So, and then growing up was frustrating too, because one time I expressed an opinion about supporting gay marriage, and this was when I was in my 20s. And a response I got was, "You support gay marriage? Are you sure you're even Indian?" It was a joke. At that time, I was terribly annoyed, but now I see the humor in it. It just seems like apparently being Indian means being traditional and conservative. I mean, that was the impression I got. And even from my experience in living in America, too many Americans also believe it.
Excuse me,
And
Indu. I think are you moving the slides because we can't see, like we seem to be
oh,
stuck at the first slide.
oh, it's fine. I'm not moving it.
Okay.
Not at all. I'm just but thank you though for letting me know. So for me, I know a lot of some people are thinking, not true. You can be a progressive and an Indian. And being progressive or liberal does not compromise Indian identity. So that is something I'm still kind of pondering and wondering about. Oh, let's say. Oh, there we go. Can you see it now? All right.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, there we go. You can just stop for a minute. So when I was in college, I started friending Indian international students, a very friendly group of people. And then I met a girl there who was another progressive Malayali. And I was excited because I wanted to practice my Malayalam after so many years. And we had some things in common, like with progressive ideas. And we had some crazy ideas, that we both can understand each other about. And I mean, I was an English major, and she was majoring in anthropology. And we laughed about how that's not a very typical Indian major, because most of the other international students were majoring in more practical things like engineering and IT. And then that friend made me a comment that she noticed that many Indians who grew up here in the US are like living in the 50s. India has changed. What happened? And what happened to it too? Because what happens is that with Many immigrant families, like, and here I'm talking about Indians, who left India for the US in the 80s or 90s, kept that same mentality back then and wanted to maintain it and keep up their culture and hope that the kids keep it. But of course, as we know, culture changes, and India is no exception. And this is not just limited to India. Here's another example for misunderstood. This is Ali, an 18-year-old who is lived in Canada and UK, and then she returned to China for a bit. China, but she's originally, her family is Korean. So her comment was, my parents are a lot more culturally connected to Korea than I am. They teach me a slightly outdated Korean culture that existed 25 years ago. Consequently, older Korean adults like me, but I find it harder to get along with Koreans my age. So that's another shared experience. So now, growing up, what are some benefits of being a TCK? You have an expanded worldview. TCKs generally have an understanding that's more than one way to look at situations that they are exposed to or experience. This can be a challenge, however, when TCKs return to a culture that's homogeneous in their belief system and as an expanded worldview is perceived as offensive or useless. For example, language skills. Somebody may be bilingual, but in some parts of the United States, doesn't really help with jobs or any situation. Then having a 3D view of the world. An increased number of hands-on experiences in multiple cultures, a difference in the way, there's a difference in how the world is perceived. Like, for example, now we're seeing more literature like Khalid Hosseini's The Kite Runner. Those get perceived as well-rounded or deep, but it's just a different way. And with that, it can also be frustrating too, because you just see like the realities of everything. And you tend to have a cynical view, and then it can get frustrating to others who don't see it the same way as you do. And then sometimes with some TCKs, very outward shows of nationalism can make them uncomfortable. So interpersonal sensitivity is one of the benefits. You get exposure to a variety of perspectives. So you can monitor the emotions and understand different social norms and adapt quickly and understand like, okay, different people have different ways of it. And not assume like, okay, there's a difference. Is that person being rude or weird? What's so weird about it? And then there's cross-cultural competence or cultural intelligence, able to kind of work with different groups. And TCKs generally have been found to have higher levels of general adjustment as opposed to monocultural children. I mean, adaptability is a benefit, but it does have a challenge. Because one thing they found out is a lot of TCKs as teenagers are generally more mature than their peers. But then when they reach their 20s, they take longer to make decisions about college, about marriage. I mean, these days, people do tend to delay marriage or change their careers. It's not like what it used to be, but there's a difference in why those decisions are made. And a major benefit, however, is related to language exposure. So not just foreign languages, even dialects of English. And that's why as an editor, I became really interested in the differences between British and American English and different variances of dialect. And I edit that. So it's something that I love to learn about. And something I would say I specialize in. I think next week I'll be giving a presentation on the differences between British and American English. So those are the benefits. Challenges. It also comes with its challenges, just like anything else. One is confused loyalty. There's a lot of confusion with politics and where you feel you identify with, where you can feel like you can support. For example, TCK is not an answer, where is home? And, even identity things like having political views. Like, I'm trying to think, like I was just saying, if US and India decide to go in a war, I would have very mixed feelings. I wouldn't know what to do. Something like that. That would be a very difficult thing. And I can imagine a lot of Japanese Americans who felt that way during the World War II. And then, sometimes simplistic things, loyalties. For example, in the US, there's a lot of negative associations with the word socialism. And if I feel like socialism, it really depends what it is. Having something more nuanced, I get a lot of backlash from that. And that's kind of like where the frustration is. And then painful awareness of reality. Adjusting to cultures where the culture is very focused on itself. And I think it happens everywhere too. Because growing up, you would hear things like, oh, Indian values, don't adapt the Western values. I'm like, what are you talking about? There's good and bad in both. And we have an opportunity to learn from both. And it happens the other way too. Sometimes, even the Western world too, can sometimes look at other cultures in a very patronizing way. So trying to find that reality and deal with people around you is difficult. And then sometimes ignorance of home culture, not knowing their own home culture and town or family, feeling like an outsider when they go back home. That's another challenge too. And it's not really, it's just because they just didn't have an experience. And also, but that this is changing because of the internet. You can always learn more. And also, I'm able to have conversations with all of you, which was not possible like 20 or 30 years ago. So because of the interconnectedness, that is kind of a little bit better. But the only thing is understanding a culture's sense of humor is difficult. That makes it difficult to transition because that's something you could just never learn. For example, there's different, and that's something we notice. Like you see British comedy and then American comedy, it's so different from each other. And sometimes for me, this could be a language barrier too. When I'm watching like Bollywood films, I can understand enough Hindi just to understand them as subtitles. But then there's the deeper level, the jokes. I don't always understand them. But then I have to ask somebody to explain it to me. But if somebody explains a joke to me, it's not that funny. Sometimes that's the one where people have trouble with. Seems like with humor, the only humor that's universal is slapstick kind of comedy. Um, so then difficulties with adjusting to adult life, trying to figure out where do you want to be home, and then feeling that rootlessness. That's what makes the transition to adulthood a challenging period for TCKs. It's like, what career do you choose? Who do you want to marry? And that's why one reason a lot of TCKs delay it is because they're so used to change. So then when everything changes and having the stability feels not stability, having the same thing for a long time feels different or uncomfortable. And we're all creatures of habit. Sometimes what we know, the familiar, even if it's good or bad, is comfortable. About young TCKs in educational settings, especially international schools. If counselors and more people knew about that, it would be really helpful to do that. But when there's not a lot of, when you live in a place where a lot of adults also don't know about it, they don't know how to help you. So this is really good to help. And the good thing is these days we have a lot more resources. And imperial life, what happens inside the mind of a TCK? Like I mentioned before, the restlessness and rootlessness. I mean, you're used to constant change and always ready for the next move. For me as an adult, I just got used to it. And you guys hear me? Just thought I got connected here. But for me, I just feel like I need change. I need to try something different. So for me, it was more like I want to explore different interests and hobbies. I like the differences and change, having with different groups of people. And then, so for some people, it kind of appears impulsive, reckless, or sometimes immature. But it's not necessarily true. But then I did hear from some people saying, hey, you're doing all these in schools. I always want to participate in everything. And I have to say, you're participating in so many different things, but why not focus on one or two and go deep? And I heard about, I became more conscious about going wide, but not deep. Or, there's a term, jack of all trades, but master of one. Like it's good to learn different skills, but not very well, or pick a few. So I kind of found a compromise. So, for example, when I feel that restlessness, when I need change, I used to learn something new, and especially in this pandemic time when you cannot travel, learn a new or advance a skill. But it's writing. Writing, it's something that's been my hobby for a long time. And writing and reading really helps me escape and understand life, especially sci-fi. So it's a good time to read new books, different genres that I haven't done before, or learn something new with editing. So I feel like that's a good way. And I could try something new too, something temporary, but I decided, okay, which are the things I'm going to commit to and which one I'm not. You can travel temporarily too. And you can experience different cultures at home. Because in a place like Boston, we just thought, we want to expose our kids to different differences. So we go to different festivals that are open to the public of all cultures, even though it's not ours. just so that the kids get exposed to it. And it's an adventure for me too, trying different foods. And marriage too. Like there was a time, I avoided marriage because the feeling of being lost between cultural attitudes, who to marry, how you find this person, what to expect from a marriage, rules in marriage, and is marriage even necessary? So I just delayed it for a while. And of course, my extended family, some of them don't understand it, but this is universal everywhere. They're like, "Oh, you're this age. Aren't you going to settle down? Don't you want us to find a good boy for you? Or we'll put a matrimonial for you." But I think it is just the awkwardness because when you grew up in a single culture, you know what to expect, how to go about it. But when you're between two cultures, you just don't know how to go about it. It's just very awkward and embarrassing sometimes. I don't want to. Sometimes I just didn't want to deal with it, depending on what I'm going through in life. So eventually, it did happen. I just thought I'll take my time. Why rush into a marriage? But also, times are changing too. Nowadays people are delaying marriage, for different reasons, for economic reasons, or so many other reasons. I also have another theory. It's because people are living longer than before. So different ideas. So eventually, I was going to say the reason my husband and we got along really well is because he's biracial. So we have that commonality of not belonging to either world. He felt like growing up, he felt like he didn't feel like he fit in with the white kids or Hispanics. So he felt like he was always in between. And even though he has Spanish last name, Guzman, he doesn't speak when he was in high school. So that's something we have in common with, and we both are like adventurous, have that out of the box thinking. So that's why we got along pretty well, and it just happened. And then I guess what happened to me with the TCKs, identifying what I want and my needs, but communicating in a way that doesn't appear rude, dismissive, or arrogant. So this is more challenges. Tough shell, and could be a generational thing too. Like they're always told to tough it out, that showing emotions is kind of like a sign of immaturity or weakness. And that's another thing, a lot of unresolved grief. A lot of changes happening, like losing your old friends, losing some things about your life. Even though they're small, they all do add up eventually. And sometimes with TCKs, there's this unresolved grief, so much one after the other. And then depression too, because of that. The tough shell, it helped me be resilient, and it's more of a survival tactic. Long term, it just takes its toll on you eventually. So there was a time I did struggle with depression, and for a while, I used to think it was something shameful. But now I'm happy to be living in today's world where depression and these kind of things are more not a stigma anymore, and there's more options to get help. And I think we shouldn't be judgmental because it keeps people from going out. So I was able to see a therapist, talk about it, seek writing, find other people with similar experiences. So that helped. So writing was much bigger to explore and sort it out. So currently I'm working on a novel with TCK themes. I can talk more about it in the question and answer round. Another thing is I felt like I had to be committed to diversity as the editor. But I do get frustrated with people who don't seem to get it. Because now, in the publishing industry, everybody wants diverse books. And we want to be more, be part of social justice. But sometimes it feels frustrating when I feel like it's just diversity for sake of it, or really at the superficial level, but really focus on the differences, but not showing the similarities. Because I feel like you got to also show the similarities with human nature across cultures. And TCK problems and life problems. Sometimes, what we think about, so you think like, oh, it's better not to move abroad. No, it's not like it's just a TCK problem. It's also a life problem. But TCK just adds different dynamics to it. For example, friendships and lack of community, my extroversion made up for it. For me, it's like for one time, I used to be jealous of people who grew up in the same town. They had the same friends since, kindergarten. I used to feel very jealous of those people. But then I found out, there's good and bad to both sides. And and also being a TCK, I used to be very shy, believe it or not. But eventually being outside this culture, and sometimes, when I did feel with prejudice, the way I used to fight back is I became more bolder. And I would, talk back because I was afraid of, talking back and being bold. I just started, sometimes that was the way to deal with it. So it got me out of my shell. and then made me kind of want to pursue things, harder. Because if somebody's judging me or being prejudiced, I just want to prove them wrong. So in a way, I can thank them for that. And then marital strength. And here's the other thing about when you move abroad, if you are already having struggles, whether it's personal or in your marriage, moving abroad will just exemplify it. It will just make it bigger. So unfortunately, my parents, they divorced a few years ago, and there's all that trauma, that comes with life. Trying to, because I learned how to put on a tough shell, I didn't really face a lot of things, and that just carried on. And only I was able to work it out later. So it helped me, understand a few things about people, and like a lot of my novels have the psychology in it, you know. And then seeing the humor in situations, and I tend to be pretty blunt or straightforward. It's kind of hard to tell if it's a TCK thing or just because it's just my way of simplifying the complexities of identity or things like that. So now I'm going to talk about TCK in literature, movies, and pop culture. There's a lot out there, even though it's not really marketed as a third culture kid experience. Like here's a few for children. This one right here, Home James, is about a 13-year-old who is moving abroad and coming back. He's an American child living in China, but has to return back, and he's trying to struggle with his struggle about fitting back. So it's a good book for anybody who's like generally about 10 to 14 years old. So it's a good YA book. Another one is if you're planning to move abroad and you want to talk to kids about moving abroad, young children who are 8 years or younger, this is a good book right here. Passport for Bunbun. And here's another one, Pashmina by Nidhi Chinani. This is kind of like mid-grade. It's about a girl who finds out that her mom left her dad just to find out the family secret because her mom wouldn't talk about it. And then she finds a magical Pashmina where she explores, the feeling in between two worlds. These are some good books. And now I'm just happy to see that there's a lot of resources now. Here's another website. You can visit thirdcultureliterature.blogspot.com. She makes some suggestions of books that you can read. And you guys too, if you have suggestions, feel free to share it in the chat. Here's one, Foreign Bodies by Fleet Tan. I hope I said it right. It's about a Singaporean who's dating an expat, and he gets in trouble with the law. And Singapore has that reputation for this very draconian kind of punishment, like caning and even death penalties for that. So she fights against them. It's about like traditional modern values with Singapore. That really is a good way to explore the TCK life. And then Swimming in the Congo. This is about a life as a missionaries kid in the 1960s. And The Great Santini. This is a novel about a young man growing up in the army base and having trouble finding his identity and relating to his father. So this is a really good book for military families, or especially for young men who are having difficulties struggling with emotions or finding their identity. And it's Americana, one of my favorites. Chimananda really talks a lot about, about Nigerian America returning back, because that's not a challenge too. An immigrant will be an immigrant when they move out of the country, and when they return, they can be the third culture kids at home. So these are some, and I'm sure there's plenty more. Here are the movies I thought I could share. This is one I haven't seen this yet, but I heard good reviews about it. Road Home by Rahul Gandera. I can read it. And then it's about a British boy. He's 10 years old and he's sent to a boarding school in India, and he's having difficulty adjusting. So he runs away from the boarding school and travels to India and goes on this adventure. It's a very short movie, 24 minutes. And then this one, then we have Matt Damon's Born Identity. It's about a CIA agent who wakes up with amnesia, and he's traveled to different worlds and he just doesn't know who he is, but he ultimately discovers that. So anything with the Born Identity really touches on a lot of the issues that TCKs deal with. And then here's Lindsay Lohan's Mean Girls. It's a story about an American girl who grew up in Africa. The parents were there, they were scientists there, but the movie doesn't say which country in Africa exactly. So she's an American girl, and she's trying to adjust back to, high school teenage culture. So the teen culture is very different in America. And it's just like she's talking about adjusting, going through the school cliques and everything. I mean, it's pretty hilarious and interesting. I would say some of it is very exaggerated. And I think it's meant to be hyperbolic. And a lot of American movies, for example, they just air out their dirty laundry and it's hyperbole. So that is not, I always say, don't take it literally because that is really not, a lot of it is exaggerated, not really what it's like with my experience. And here's a Malayalam movie, ABCD, American Born Confused Daisy. This movie is just kind of okay. It's about a ABCD or an Indian American boy who goes and he's very spoiled and reckless of his life. So his father sends him back to India for him to, grow up or learn discipline. But this movie felt like, I have to always talk about movies that are not recommended to. I mean, it was just an okay movie, but I felt like he does touch upon the TCK experience, but it's very narrow. It talks about, TCKs who are born in a very wealthy, affluent environment. And a couple of things it does, I like about the movie so much is I felt like they were being stereotypical. There were a few racial stereotypes towards Black, dark skinned, and African Americans. Because in the beginning, the movie starts with how he and a Black man were fighting over a white girl. And the way they portrayed women are it's just objectifying women as objects to be pursued. And also, like, the villains are, they were either Black African Americans or dark skinned Indians. So I felt like that was just not very, just bringing up racism. I didn't really, that kind of put a bad taste on me. There were parts that were funny. So, an ABCD, if you're not sure, ABCD is just the term for American Born Confused Daisy. So, those are a few movies I have. So, what's the thoughts? So, if some of you are thinking, I just got this job abroad. Should I move abroad with my family? Is it selfish of me? Will I put my things through it? Not so, not really necessarily. A majority of TCKs, with the struggles and the complexities, they wouldn't trade their life for anything. It brings up a lot. And it really depends on person to person too. One thing you want to consider is when you're moving abroad, think about your support. Who's your community and your support system? Generally, I'm thinking of like, if you're business people, does your company have do they give support for moving in? Do they have social? How are they with social programs? And then there are there expat organizations in the area, or generally, like if it's a mission, if they're missionary kids, there's a church support. So those are the things you want to think about. Who's your community over there? And then trailing spouses. That is a person who joins their partner in moving abroad. And sometimes being a trailing spouse can be the most lonely and most frustrating role, depending on which country you're in, and if there's a language barrier, and also the attitudes towards women. Those are all things to think about. And sometimes it's hard for her it can be a big change, especially when somebody's used to working, but now not able to get a job. And then another thing you want to think about is the family's input. What does the family think about moving abroad? Are they ready? Everybody ready to move abroad? And then lifestyle. And also, like I mentioned before, some of them are just not uniquely PCK problems, but they're normal life problems. And you want to think about things too. And another thing is marriage too. It's I would say, at least because when you move abroad, and if there's already some issues in marriage, moving abroad will just bring it out even more. How do you deal with stress with each other? How are you going to be a support with each other? It's not just necessarily parents too. But something I made thinking about is, are you controlling people? Controlling people, I would say they would have a very tough time moving abroad. For example, controlling. Like the very controlling people. For example, the kids' identity. Kids, since they're not experiencing and they're feeling like they're in between two worlds and they don't feel particularly loyal to one country, they may criticize, your culture that you grew up with, and some things you were close to. So how would you take it? Would you take it personally, or that can be difficult too? And that's where parents and kids kind of get into trouble. Because I remember actually one of the teachers of my school. I mean, she's older. She was saying she lived abroad most of her life. She was saying that her son one time was saying he grew up abroad, and he was one time criticizing things about America. And she felt a little, she could feel a little emotion coming up. Like, oh, it's not that bad as you think it is. She wanted to say that, but she said that she had to kind of bite her tongue, let him talk, and accept that's who he is. And kids too, they may, they're experiencing different cultures, and they will learn it. They will kind of form their own. If you're really trying to control everybody, put a tight rein on everyone, it's gonna really wear you out, and it's just not gonna help. And cultural shaping too. How's the culture gonna shape you? I mean, there's things you can pick and choose, but you got to be realistic, and also the expectations realistic. Those are the things you want to think, and also, being proud of your own background. That happens with age, and sometimes you don't think about it for a 13-year-old. I mean, you cannot expect a 13-year-old, to have the life experience and maturity of a 25-year-old. And for a 13-year-old, they just care about having friends and not being, different. And it takes some time for, young children to realize that, oh, being different is not a bad thing. And what I've noticed is generally with kids, they may struggle to it. Some kids will, have aversion. They would really hate one country over the other, or they will kind of flip back and forth. And they will go through these phases and have these strong emotions. But the important thing is to just support the kids, let them be themselves, because it's tough as it is out there. If they come home and they feel like they have a safe place where they're accepted, that would be the best to help the kids cope with, moving abroad. And same with spouses too. Like, how much are you able to talk about it? So that's just what I have to say. So after thoughts, when a global nomad settles. That's me in Dubai, in the Dubai Creek back in the day. And this is me again in Dubai, about 7 years ago when I visited. Dubai has changed a lot too. And just basically, I think back of my background it makes me think about how do I view the world. And now when I'm home here, having, this is us, we decided to go to a Indian festival. And my husband's like, why don't we just wear the Indian clothes? My mother bought him a sherwani when she visited, and it's like, let's going to wear sari. And that time I was pregnant. I was like, okay, sure. And I'm sorry, my family's laughing at me because when they saw the picture, because I'm not very good at sari draping, and it's been a while, so I have to relearn how to do it. And those are our kids. That's Eddie and Ava. So I'm kind of thinking, I always think about, okay, what's their experience going to be like? How do we raise them? We just have to let them find their own identity, but also learn how to be a sport. And we just kind of are seeing what it is. So that is all I have to say for now. And this time I'm open for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Indu, for a very interesting presentation. And we will have comments first from Jyotirmoy. He was smiling throughout the session. So,
No, it's actually I think Indu's presentation sort of took me back to cousins of mine who had kind of moved to the US and grew up in the US. They were born in the US. Their parents moved, and kind of the way I saw. I'm thinking of one person especially. She was the kind of person, and I didn't see her very well. Indu talks about this, not being, kind of a, what should I say, not wanting to do a lot of things, not being very decisive, or somehow. I found her a very, very scrappy kid. But now listening to Indu, I think I feel sorry for some of my behavior back then, because I think I understand her psyche much better. I mean to say, this cousin of mine. So it's interesting. Of course, I think she was not a third culture kid, because she sort of, her parents moved to the US, immigrated, and she was born there, and she's married there, in the sense she's married an Indian there, etc., etc. So I don't know whether she falls under the third culture category, but it's the same kind of, some of the stories that Indu was saying about people who are moving, countries, and the kind of rootlessness maybe. So that's really a kind of, that's why I was smiling, sort of thinking back many years actually.
And also, but you're very, that's really, I'm glad it helped you give some perspective. I would say,
Yeah,
from what I'm hearing, your cousin probably sounds more like an immigrant. And that's the
Yeah, she is
difference.
more of she is
Okay.
an immigrant. Yeah, absolutely, very clearly. In the sense,
But she
she
would be a
was
TCK if she returns to India.
okay. Okay. Oh, she'll be a TCK if she returns. And well, she did. They actually tried to stay in India for 2 3 years, and I think she had a very hard time. And
Mhm.
it's very funny. She was more connected to Indian culture than her brother. Her brother was really very American in the sense, he wouldn't even speak our languages. But I found later, as they've grown up, they're younger to me, the young gentleman, he seems to be able to handle it much better than she ever handled it herself. She couldn't really take India because I think she was throwing a lot of the US when she was here for 2 3 years, and none of the cousins or even people outside she met took it very comfortably, sort of thing. So it's just an experience kind of thing, but it's very personal. So maybe, but your kind of talk sort of brought me back, brought memories back, sort of. Yeah, yeah. And she and me, we really didn't get along well. Sort of, we don't talk to each other, though our parents are very close. Yeah. So yeah, talking about I don't know, clash of cultures or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
Yes, Kanis.
yeah, I have a reverse experience. I went to America by ship when I was 4 years old. I can speak American because that's my first language, but I had to get rid of my American accent when I went to Miranda House College. So I can speak like this also. So now I have a neutral accent. Okay, when I came back from America, I had a really hard time. And I went to the American school and I excelled and I did all kinds of things. My father was a diplomat that when he came back, his salary was less than the drivers of the other American classmates. So that was an economic change for us. But my mother and father went to America with very open hearts. We have 2 or 3 generations of English behind us. My mother was a bookworm. My father was the first director of tourism for the Western Hemisphere, which was never given again to anyone. And we lived there for 8 years. And then we came back in 2 weeks. So that was a bit of a shock. However, I did something very strange. I finished college and I got myself married to a person who was very, very much in the 14th century with chuachut and covering heads. And I lived in Chandni Chowk for 3.5 years. And then I found I wasn't growing. And my parents were not very much thrilled with this marriage, though it was a perfect janam patri and a perfect, I was Tandan, all that was perfect. But they didn't think that it would go to survive. There was a lot of things going on. Anyway, I left and I remarried several years later and I married a Muslim. Now, my family is not a usual family. I've told this forum many times that we are a fruitcake. From 1950, we've had people from every state of India as well as America. And I had a Negro uncle, a black Ethiopian uncle in the 50s. So my family is crazy and crazy in the way that we are very, very cosmopolitan. Now, my today is that I am a Shia practicing. My daughter lives in New Zealand. She married a person from Karnataka. And so there isn't any.
disconnect हो गया.
She's there? Okay.
Yeah, she was like
Yeah.
narrating a very interesting
Very
incidents.
interesting. It definitely, I just hope she
Yeah.
comes back. But I was going to add, like, the 2 books that I referenced here, it's expanded a lot. It really touches up on that experience, like being an expat kid. People always think, like, oh, you are an expat kid, so you're rich and wealthy. But then the 2 books, oh, you're back. Can you hear us? But
Yes,
but those 2 books I
yes.
referenced, they really have a section about the different kinds of experience, like teenagers who come to TCK like later, or even like say you are living in an international school and everything, but your family is not as wealthy as others. I mean, you still have a normal middle class life, but not the same lifestyle. So those 2 books, they really give a good section about it. I highly recommend anybody who's a TCK or interested in that, because there's a lot I could there's a lot to cover, and it was impossible for me to talk about all of it. But these two books are really great. I mean, this is the third edition, so she really expanded a lot. Yeah.
Vivek,
Yes, Kanis.
yeah, can I ask Indu a few questions, please?
I
Yeah,
had to
sure,
learn
sure.
Hindi. So I learned Hindi when I was 58 years old. After passing a test for entering college, when I was 58, I learned to read and write Hindi again. So it has been a continuous process. And my husband insisted that I was American. There was nothing Indian about me, except that I'm totally Swadeshi in all my selections. The t-shirt I wear says that there's a bit of India in all of us. And this is from a reunion that my classmates from the American school had in one of the cities in New York. Thank you.
Yes, Brigadier Carr.
Yeah, Indu, the third culture kids are basically kids who've grown up or been to US, UK, and possibly Australia. The kids who have grown up in the other countries, they do not have the same issues as the issues of US, UK, and Australia. Other than UK, most of the people in US and Australia are immigrants. They're immigrants from different countries, yet the white Americans who are actually immigrants also consider themselves as the Bhumiputra or people of America, and the rest are the rest. Now, you spoke about the Japanese during the Second World War. You'll be surprised, all the Japanese in the Second World War in America were concentrated in camps. Uh, does it mean when times are difficult, the TCKs become second-class citizens? Do the people over there have the worry if it could happen to the Japanese? It could happen, as you said, if India and US is at war, you don't know which side you would like to side or what would happen to you. So does it mean that when things have become difficult, these TCKs would become second-class citizens?
I am really glad someone brought this up, and you really here bring a really good point. This book actually does talk about it too. It's definitely true.
I think you got disconnected.
Yeah.
Yeah, she
Like there's a
seems to have got
backlash. In my opinion, I just think like what we're seeing, this backlash, and even India too, like Modi, this nationalism and that backlash. It's really a reaction to globalization and identity, because globalization challenges our identity. And yes, to answer your question too, yes, US does have a history of racism. And it used to be that, they say America is a country of immigrants. It was true. Immigrants of color were always treated as second-class citizens, literally. Because only until, I think I have to do more research on this, until the 1960s, people of color could not get a US citizenship. So in a sense, yes. And yes, you did bring up the point about Japanese Americans. They were literally, their rights were violated. And it took only like in the 90s, the US president, it was Bill Clinton, apologized for it. And now we are seeing definitely a lot more, racial attacks. They're just being out in the open. And that is sadly, that's just that's just very revealing about, America's history of racism and white supremacy. And being treated as second-class citizens, yes, you would say there's always that prejudice there. And I too faced it too at times. Like I can say, for example, same experience. I have the same experience living through life, but except instead of my parents' home country being India, say I came from Europe. By now, I would be perceived as American. They would not wonder if I'm a foreigner. And yes, in America too, they are like fourth or fifth American Japanese or Asians. who are viewed as exotic or foreigners and asked, oh, where are you from? Or they expected to be foreigners. That is still there. And now recently we heard about the attacks on Asians and Black Americans. So it is really turning around. And what we're seeing is living in a post-colonial world. And I can tell you, even in Dubai and Singapore too, being like an Indian immigrant, there were some perceptions and how, I always wondered, like, how would I be treated, you know, living there. But for some reason, I heard from what I'm hearing is being a female woman, my experience was a little bit easier. I heard like for men, it's harder. I mean, it's always there. Even in Dubai too, like sometimes I heard it's very in your face. I heard stories about, expats. Sorry, there's a little glare here, so let me turn this light off. Expats who are, like say if they, like I heard about businesses discriminating. Like for example, if you have a different passport, they'll pay you a different salary or benefit than say if you're from the US, UK, Europe. So yes, and as a person of color, I can tell you it is very frustrating. That is there. And I think this is just a lot more of a complex issue. And I think the problem with America is a lot of people, I can only speak of America because this is where I grew up. A lot of people have this assumption that in the 1960s, the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King that took care of racism, and everybody kind of buried it under the carpet. But nobody really acknowledged systematic racism. And even now, too, when you see when it's coming up, there's always that backlash or, that resistance to that. But trying to change society, especially the legacy of colonialism, because that adds a lot to the TCK experience. I honestly don't know when will we ever recover from that. So,
there is another reason. For example, you spoke about the the Indian government and things like that. Presently, I think the Indian TCKs seem to be confused as to who they really are. Have they become Americans, or they still want to consider India as their sphere of concern? They're still concerned about India, or are they Americans, or are they British? That I think that question mark is still in them, is in them now. It has become very evident lately. That's what you were saying.
Yep. That is very evident, and that's a lifelong thing because no one can ever resolve that, And that is very true. And it really depends on the person too. It really depends on the individual and the person. But yes, there is that confusion, and it takes a lifetime, And I think just in general, whether you're TCK or not, finding out who you are takes a lifetime. You won't have all the answers, by a certain age.
So anyone else with any comments or questions is welcome to unmute himself or herself.
Okay, one more question. How would you classify a child whose parents are from different countries and settled in a third country? Not USA, not UK, not Australia. How would you classify such a child? Would you call it also TCK?
That's a good question. I would say that child could be considered a TCK too, would also be, but then there's an added complexity of parents from two different cultures. But also TCK, these definitions are not very hard and clear. It just gives a general idea to understand. TCK is actually a subset of cross-cultural kids. So cross-cultural kids, for example, one subset is TCK, another subset is bicultural. And then, by the TCK definition, children of bicultural parents or like two different parents, they could technically be considered TCK. But when you look at cross-cultural kids, immigrants and a TCK, they will have some crossovers. Just like how I think it was Jyoti who mentioned about his cousin, who's having the similar experiences of rootlessness, but it's really more of an immigrant. But the only difference between an immigrant and a TCK is an immigrant kind of has his expectations. Okay, this is their home. We're not moving anymore. I have to get here, eventually. But not so much. So these are like very, but cross-cultural, there's so many subsets of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Keep those questions coming. I like it. And also,
Yeah.
anytime, if I'm not sure, you can also email me. I'm just putting my information here. I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and my website. So feel free to message me. And also, since I'm writing my novel, I'm planning to start a newsletter where I will be sharing if I'm doing other talks and my progress on my novel or any other topics. And I only would send it out like once in 3 months, but more once my novels is getting written. So if you're interested, you can always message me in any of my social media and your email, and I can add you. But yeah, definitely keep the questions going.
Yeah, it's good to have even Anthony Day, one of our past presenters. So, Anthony, do you have any questions?
Hi, not really. I'm really sorry I cannot be showing my face because data connection is very, very pathetic right now.
Okay.
But yes, it was a very engaging, session. Given that we have so many Indian origin people, in fact, including my friends who are there, and they are also facing similar kind of problem with their children because they don't know how to bring up their children. One of my friends, I remember, she actually came back from UK because she was not comfortable bringing up her child in a society which is seemingly more, promiscuous, and well,
Mm.
that's how she labeled it. Though I believe every society has its own pros and cons, but she actually came back. I mean, she asked her husband that we should go back to India for the sake of our daughter, and they actually came back. So yes, the challenges, the questions, they are very valid, and it was very engaging. Indu, thank you so much for this, and I
Mhm.
think I'm going to connect with you on Twitter.
Oh, sure. I'd love to stay in touch. Yeah, that's definitely it's a very personal decision. But from what I've seen when I was in boarding school, the so-called promiscuity, I see that in India too. Even my parents were telling me it's there, but only difference is one, it's more in your face and, in front of people, and one is behind the back. And the thing is, one thing I've experienced is a lot of people, like I had Indian parents also ask me about it, and what is this dating? And one time my parents were worried. My dad was, of course, worried, because I was 12 years old that time. We were talking and teasing each other. We were teasing each other. Oh, you like that boy? Then he goes, "What are you talking about this? You should be talking about this when you're married." He got really upset. My mom was a more matter of fact. He's like, "Come on, they're just, I was confused. I was like, "I'm not gonna run off with this boy. We're just teasing each other. He's silly." It doesn't mean I'm going to run off with him. And yes, it's parenting is very difficult. And it's not just, actually, this is a topic brought up even with religious communities in the US. And it's talked about like Christian parents. Like, for example, I mentioned Christianity because it's my religion. But even people who
Hmm.
are from other religions too, they worry about, oh, the world is being promiscuous,
Hmm.
and non religious people too. That's a concern here too. But I would say it's difficult and challenging. But I think if you kind of show example, because I think about that with because I have a daughter too and a son too. I think about both of them. It's like, how do we go against the culture? And we just talk, have honest talks with them, and we have to talk to them. We can't expect, even at the young age, because I always taught frankness and talking to kids about it. I always think, would you rather have your children hear about sex from their friends, or from health education, or from you? And can they come to you and have honest talks? Like, for example, I just thought, and the good thing is to model, set your expectations high, but be open too, so they can communicate with
Hmm.
you. Because if you feel like they cannot come to you or they feel judged for everything, what I've seen happen with some Indian families here is the more stricter and more trying to control, kids will the kids may follow along, but eventually they'll rebel and go to the other extreme. So what the parents' worst
Right.
fear will come true. So it's a very difficult thing. But also, if the culture you live in completely clashes with your value, moving back may be a good option. And I also think, like, what people
Hmm.
think about is trying to understand people around them. Because even one time an American, because my dad was talking, he was asking about this, an American told him, "Oh, whatever you see in the movies, don't believe all of it, because not all of it is true." So that's a very complex question, and it's a very personal decision. If you feel like you have to go back because it's
Right.
not working for you, it's perfectly acceptable. Your personal choice. It doesn't make you like weak or narrow minded. Ultimately, you have to make the decisions weighing everything.
Yeah, so initially we were very surprised that why would a person come back to India, given that UK is definitely a better, socioeconomic environment, and maybe, from an Indian's perspective, it is more open a society, more, quote unquote to be kind of a place.
Yeah.
But yes, of course, I totally agree with you that parenting is very difficult. I mean, handling one own self is one thing. Handling a child and bringing up a child to become the right kind of person is totally another ball game. I totally agree to that. But yes, why that's the thing that our perceptions are more based on the movies that we watch. And one of my cousins, he is in US right now. He has been in US for almost about 20 years now. So he said that the same thing that you said, that do not judge US by the movies you see. US is not in New York, and there is a huge amount of US that nobody talks about in movies. There's a kind of, well, he used the word underbelly. I don't know if it is underbelly because I have never been to US, so I cannot really subscribe to that. But yes, of course, there are a lot many aspects of societies which are not really known to outsiders. So once you start uh, living in that society, you get to know about a lot of things which are maybe shocking or unacceptable or whatever. So yes, that way I think your session kind of summarizes very well the situations that usually a person faces. Even the child cannot really understand that what's happening, because the child sees something outside, and then when he or she comes home, the discussions and the environment is totally different.
Yeah. And what really affects the child is friendships. For me, what kept me was like, I guess when I was younger, I mean, I was not religious particularly. I was like, I'm a feminist. I can choose what I want. And, we had health ed, or what they call sex ed here. They talked about STDs, reproductive organs, and, all those things. One of the things is they did talk about, choices, and consent is one thing they do talk about. And promiscuity too, it's there. But it really depends on who you hang out with and peer pressure. Because peer pressure has a more significant impact. I mean, I have to admit, feeling like, oh, to me, like I was comfortable not having a boyfriend in high school. I thought I have time for this. I just want to have friends with both boys and girls. And we were just truly friends, nothing, you know? But then sometimes when it's prom and all this stuff, I feel like left out a little bit. But then and I thought, you know what, this is my choice. And I thought, I used to go to prom and homecoming with a group of friends. Both boys and girls, or just a friend, who may be a boy. But just friends, that's what I did too. And my friends are pretty good. They're like, if you're not ready for a relationship, you don't have to. They didn't put the peer pressure. So as a parent, the best thing to do is to find people who you have in common with. And I was thinking with my kids, this is what I would do. They become teenagers and be involved in their life. I mean, recognize them as growing up, but also get to know the families and who they're hanging out with. And if they have good, friends, and get to know their friends too, invite them over to your house, because then you can get to know who they are and the parents,
Right.
and
Yeah.
build that relationships of
Yeah.
trust. And then
I get it. Right.
you. Yeah.
So
So I think, yeah.
So I told this to my friend also, that that your concern of promiscuity and being a quote unquote more open society, that's very one relative, because it's not that you don't see these things in India. Of course not, maybe the way you see it there, because here many things are in a very layered fashion, so you don't really get to see them overtly on the face kind of a situation. But these are the typicalities of society, and these are the typicalities of human societies everywhere around the world. These things will be there. The entire idea is to get the best out of it. So for us living in India, we feel that okay, a developed country like US, UK, Australia, they are definitely the better places to live. But yes, of course, again, personal decision, and you can't really force anyone to do something that they don't want to do. So thank you so much. It was very engaging. Let's connect on Twitter, and maybe we can discuss more about it there.
Sure, definitely.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. So, any comments from
Thank you, Vivek. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, any comments from Kora, Devanand Paul, and Niranjana?
Thank you, Indu. Indu. It was a very interesting session. Actually, I have a lot of cousins, brothers-in-law, all immigrants and third culture, laws in the family. So I could relate to a lot of things that you were talking about, and I think as someone is earlier said, I would be able to relate better to them, understand them better now after listening to your session, why they react and the way they are doing and all that. I think so. That way also this session is going to help me a lot, and it was a very interesting. And thanks for those books. So
You're
I
welcome.
definitely be having a look at all. I'm sure I'll be reading all of them. Thank you for introducing us to those books.
Yes, Cora.
Yeah, well, it was a nice session. Oh my God, what happened? Something came up. It was a nice, interesting session because I have a lot of my cousin, my sister, and her family, entire family lives uh, in Canada and now in the US, and they initially lived in Dubai. So I remember when they would come here, we would kind of really have a tough time making them, settle out here. So right now, when they come here, it is a little difficult. So I can understand what she's talking about because they don't know whether they're Indian or they're Canadian at the moment.
No.
So
Yeah, that confusion always remains. And
yeah.
we have Devanand Paul from Bangladesh if he wants to share something. Otherwise, we will close the session. Yes, Mr.
Vivek, the
Devanand.
session was really good. This is Bharati, Devanand Paul's wife.
Okay, okay.
Enjoyed the session, and me being a bicultural, biracial product of a biracial marriage, I could relate to so many of her points. And this mixture of culture and where do you exactly belong and all, it's always there. I don't think it'll ever go. So it was really interesting to listen to her perspective. It was really good. Thank you for this session.
Thanks, Anna. So thanks to all the participants for sharing their comments. And we will have like next Sunday in new session on US English and British English, what the differences between the two. And it will be at a different time at 6 p.m. Indian Standard Time. Uh, Indu, what time will it be for you?
No, I have to look. I believe it's 7:30 or it's 7:30 or 8 somewhere. I have to figure out what time it
Okay,
is.
okay. And next Saturday we will have the travel series session by Chetan Mahajan, who lives in Uttarakhand, and he runs a writing retreat. And Jyotirmay, if you have been through his book like The Bad Boys of Bokaro,
Yeah.
can you just give a 2-line intro?
Yeah, it's a small book. He was see, the gentleman was jailed because of accusations of fraud or something like that, which of course was not true. So he writes about his jail experiences in that little book. That is Chetan himself, and well, it's an interesting read, and it's stories about being in a jail. So it's it's
But
nothing very nice to read. I've read the book.
yeah, but he will have like other experiences also
Yeah,
to share.
but what's interesting is in the book actually I found was he has as a writer he has managed to sort of keep a distance and actually bring it out like a story, in a sense that all of those chaps inside the jail, they are like characters including himself. So in a sense I was rather amazed by that. There's no somebody, I was just thinking, like, let's say somebody goes into a jail and it's a crazy experience, I'm sure. And but then being able to come out, and actually he visited the jail again later to meet some of those guys. So I thought it's like I'm really amazed by the guy, frankly.
Yeah, he's a TEDx speaker, so I'm sure it's going to be an amazing session.
Yeah.
He has also been into a lot of other things, organizing motorcycling tours. So Brigadier Hirakar would be interested in that.
Yeah.
And essentially, I think after the jail experience, he also moved out of the corporate life. There's a story about corporate fraud there, how a corporation doesn't really look after their own staff. And this was the senior staff, that is Chetan himself. This is how I read the story. So, there are corporates and there are corporates and the hell of a lot of fraud going on. So that's one thing that comes up, because after that he really doesn't go back to corporate life. He goes into the life which we see him doing now, which is, as you said, cycling and other kind of stuff, and the Himalayan writing retreat and lots of other interesting stuff he's doing.
Okay. So Jyotirmay Anthony has a comment that you look like Mr. late Mr. Pranab Mukherjee.
Yeah. Yes, Jyoti bhai.
Sir, very good. ये बहुत कुछ बोला है, I don't know why.
So thanks Indu for us like taking out time on a morning, and like again you will be taking a session next Sunday. Murugraj, you want to end this session with a comment?
The next session is by Indu. The Sunday session, next Sunday.
Yeah,
Vivek?
next Sunday 6 p.m. is by Indu. Tomorrow's session about editing translated text, it's by Sara Kitauji from Australia. And the message that she sent me, like it has been raining really badly at the place she stays, and actually like the first floor is flooded. There is a warning by the premier of that province. So I don't know, like I just hope everything remains in control and we are able to have the session tomorrow.
Okay.
Yes, Murugraj.
Yeah, I was just wondering if the major cities in India, or perhaps even major cities around the world, are acting like a microcosm of this TCK. All right. For example, myself, I have been in Chennai for the past 6 years or so. Earlier to that, my family doesn't have any connection with Chennai. In fact, my parents were so strongly against me moving to Chennai. Okay, but even though it's the same state, the same language, culture, but still there's a lot of difference between the way the original Chennaites live here and we the outsiders of and to Chennai live. I think this is true for most major cities. So that way I was trying to, I was thinking whether these TCKs, we are akin to these TCKs at a, uh, micro level.
Yeah, I guess. I remember my nephew. I had to literally force him to learn Hindi, and he says, "Why do I need Hindi?" And then he had to travel on his own, and he realized why he needed it, because he couldn't even speak to the cab driver to tell him where to take him. So now when he comes back years later, he tells me, "I wish I'd listened to you earlier." So
Experience teaches better than elderly wisdom.
yeah, I guess.
Thanks everyone.
Wonderful
And
session, Indu.
yeah, Indu, I hope you got some inputs for your novel. Like the participants will be in touch, those who are interested in these topics and in these issues. And that's all for today. Have a nice day, everyone. See you tomorrow at 11 a.m.